Hello, my science lovers. This is the next episode of Scientist Mel Shorts, a series I have where I take a topic I've discussed on the science of and I condense it down for people who love science but are short on time. Today we're going to talk about influence. So let's go ahead and get started. So here we are talking about the science of influence. So what I'm going to cover today are the experiments associated with how we determine how people are influenced, confirmation bias, and manipulation tactics. The experiments that I'm going to cover are the Milgram experiment, where Dr. Milgram investigated the just following orders defense, and the Stanford Prison experiment on how societal roles play a role in how people become compliant as well as being easily influenced. So let's first talk about the Milgram experiment. In 1963, Stanley Milgram wanted to investigate justification for the genocide performed by the millions of Germans during World War II. This was sparked by the Adolf Eichmann war criminal trial in 1961, where the defense, "I was just following orders," was used regularly by him and other officers. Milgram wanted to answer this particular question. Could it be that Eichmann and his million accomplices in the Holocaust were just following orders? Could we call them all accomplices? He wanted to investigate if Germans were particularly obedient to authority figures or if this is everyone. He designed an experiment to see just how far ordinary people would go if they had the knowledge that what they were doing could potentially harm and possibly kill another human being. An ad was placed in the newspaper and the subjects were given around $4 just for showing up. There were 40 males aged between 20 and 50 years with varying types of jobs. So what I want to talk about a little bit is the particular setup that they had for the Milgram experiment. Now we had three different roles. We had the experimenter, who is this authority figure, also kind of seen as a researcher scientist. We have the subject, who is the teacher, who would ask questions and administer shocks for incorrect answers. And then we have the student, who pretends to feel pain. And if they answer questions incorrectly, they supposedly feel that type of pain. Now they drew straws to determine which individual would be the subject and which individual would be the student. And the thing was, it was rigged. So they had an actor pretend to be in pain and hollering out while the teacher would sit there and ask the questions. Now, the different prods that the experimenter would use. So for instance, if the teacher, the subject, were to say, I don't want to do this, the first prod question would be, please continue. And if the teacher, the subject, kept pushing, the next thing that the experimenter would say is, the experiment requires you to continue. And then the next one would be, it is absolutely essential that you continue. And then the last thing that the experimenter, the authority figure, would say is, you have no other choice but to continue. So I have a particular video that shows the Milgram experiment in action, and you can check out the entire video on YouTube. It's really easy to find, so let's have a look.
A decade earlier, psychologist Stanley Milgram had also looked at how we respond to authority. In order to understand how people were induced to obey unjust regimes and participate in atrocities such as the Holocaust, he set up an experiment. Volunteers were told they were taking part in scientific research to improve memory.
Would you open those and tell me which of you is which, please? Teacher. Learn.
Separated by a screen, the teacher would ask the learner questions in a word game and administer an electric shock when the answer was incorrect. He was told to increase the voltage with each wrong answer.
Cloud, horse, Rock. House. Answer. Wrong. 150 volts. Answer. Horse.
Oh. Experiment. That's all. Get me out of here. Get me out of here, please.
Continue, please. Go right on.
I refuse to go on. Let me out.
He refuses to go on. The experiment requires you continue, teacher. Please continue.
Participants didn't know that the learner was really an actor and the so-called shocks harmless.
You're gonna get a shock. 180 volts.
Oh. I can't stand the pain. Let me out of
You
here.
can't stand it. I'm not gonna kill that man, eh? I mean, who's gonna take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman? I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please. All right, next one. Slow. Walk, dance, truck, music.
Two-thirds of volunteers were prepared to administer a potentially fatal electric shock when encouraged to do so by what they perceived as a legitimate authority figure. In this case, a man in a white coat.
375 volts. I think something's happened to that fellow in there. I don't get no answer. He was hollering with less voltage. Can't you check in to see if he's all right, please?
Milgram's findings horrified America. They showed that decent American citizens were as capable of committing acts against their conscience as the Germans had been under the Nazis.
All right. So there's a lot of different things to kind of look at when we're discussing the Milgram experiment. So 65%, that's 2/3 of participants, also known the teachers, continued to the highest level of 450 volts. All the participants continued to 300 volts, 450 being lethal. 450 being about lethal, close to lethal, and 300 volts causing some kind of damage. Milgram did more than one experiment, and he carried out about 18 variations of his study, and I'll get into those in just a minute. What he found was ordinary people are likely to follow orders given by an authority figure, even to the extent of killing an innocent human being. Obedience to authority is ingrained in all of us from the way that we are brought up in society. People tend to obey orders from other people if they recognize this particular authority in that individual, and they have to have two factors to that. It has to be morally right and or legally based. And this response to legitimate authority is learned throughout our lives in a variety of different types of situations. Family, school, workplace. We learn which individuals are authority figures. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we call agency theory. That's something that Milgram kind of coined in this regard. We have autonomous versus agentic. Autonomous means people direct their own actions. Agentic means people allow others to direct them. So there's an agent that's controlling them on what they're supposed to do. Let's break it down. How do we get to this agentic state? Well, there's two factors to that when in regards to influencing other people to do things for you. The person given the orders is perceived as qualified to do so. So that you have to encourage a person that you're an authority figure. So we have authority figures that are qualified to actually be able to direct you to do a particular thing you may not have any expertise in. The other thing is the person being ordered believes the authority will accept responsibility for any and all consequences, legally, morally, ethically, all of that. So if you have those particular factors in place, you can shift a person from autonomous state to agentic state. So let's talk about those other studies that Milgram performed, these variations. He wanted to dig a bit further and find, what are these factors that influence people to follow orders. He did a change of location. Turns out that matters. The more prestigious the building, obedience increases. So if he had performed that particular experiment at a cafe or a community center instead of a university or a government building, you wouldn't have as much obedience as in one of the more prestigious buildings. Uniform, clothing matters. So lab coats increase this qualification and thus the obedience from individuals. So if you look like you know what you're talking about, then you can kind of reinforce that particular expertise. Now, if you have 2 teachers instead of 1, more teachers means that more responsibility is shared. So if you have a couple of teachers sitting there, the ones that are administering the shocks, it's not just you, it's another person that would share in some kind of responsibility. If you have peer pressure from other teachers that were, to say, oppose continuing on with the experiment, this also dropped obedience. So if you had a teacher's like, I don't want to do this anymore, they could encourage the other teacher to join along with them. Kind of what we, see as far as this peer pressure reduces obedience. Now, if the experimenter, the scientist, the researcher was not in the room, obedience also drops. So some key points to take from the Milgram experiment. What he wanted to do is he wanted to set up a simple experiment at Yale, and he tested how much pain an ordinary citizen would inflict on another person simply because he was ordered to by an experimental scientist. Stark authority was pitted against the subject's strongest moral imperatives against hurting others, and with the subject's ears ringing with the screams of the victims. Authority won more often than not. The extreme willingness of adults to go to almost any lengths on the command of an authority constitutes the chief finding of the study and the fact most urgently demanding explanation. So this is a little bit scary. People will go to simple lengths and completely kill another innocent human being if they feel that there's an authority figure present who's qualified to give them orders and will accept at least all the responsibility morally, ethically, legally, all of it. And so that was quite a shocking discovery for the U.S. to find out that this is at home as well. It's not just overseas with the Germans and the Nazis. This is at home as well. Okay, so kind of branching over into the second experiment I want to talk about is the Stanford Prison Experiment, which kind of reinforces a lot of the Milgram experiment. In 1973, Dr. Zimbardo wanted to investigate how readily and easily people would conform to the roles of guard and prisoner in a role-playing exercise that simulated prison life. This was sparked from the reports of brutality among guards in U.S. prisons. He wanted to see if it was due to sadistic personalities of the guards, and this is what we call dispositional. Is it about their disposition? Or was it more to do with the actual environment of the prison? So that would be situational. So given an example here, prisons and guards may have personalities that conflict that would lead to aggressive interactions. Perhaps it's inevitable. Prisoners lack respect for the law, and guards are domineering. So it's a clashing thing. That's dispositional. So alternatively, prisoners and guards may act hostile due to the rigid power structure that a prison kind of reinforces with the environment. So that's situational. Now, if the prisoners and guards behaved without aggression, this would support that personality hypothesis, this disposition hypothesis. Or if they behave the same way as people do in real prisons, this would support this idea of the environment having a role in how people behave. So I have a video for you, and it's from the film The Stanford Prison Experiment that came out in 2015 by the Independent Film Channel, that you can actually go to. You can Google Stanford Prison Experiment and actually go to the website where they talk about the research associated with this, along with actual footage of the experiment. So let's go ahead and have a look at this particular trailer for this film. And I actually have seen it, and I should warn you, if you have any kind of issues with PTSD or violence or stuff like that, this may not be a film for you.
Would you rather be a guard or a prisoner?
I don't think I have the qualities to be a guard.
Prisoner.
Prisoner, I guess.
Prisoner. Sounds like it would be a little less work.
Prisoner.
Why's that?
Nobody likes guards.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. This experiment will be an extension of my research into the effects prisons can have on human behavior.
You're going to be pleased to know that you all have been chosen to be the prison guards.
But under no circumstances whatsoever are you to physically assault the prisoners in any way. So remember, just as you were watching the prisoners, my graduate staff and I will be watching you.
All right, gentlemen, we're gonna have ourselves a lot of fun.
Rule number 1, prisoners must remain silent. This is an exercise period.
Okay, is it just me, or are these guys taking this thing a bit too seriously? Why don't you give me 20 push-ups?
Look at this guy. Thinks he's John Wayne or something.
You address me as Mr. Correctional Officer.
This might be an interesting 2 weeks after all.
Why don't you make up your bunk, 8612?
I did, Mr. Correctional Officer.
Well, that's not what I see.
Hey, what are you doing? I just made that!
What was that?
You just hit him. You're not supposed to hit him.
Should we step in?
No, let the guards figure it out. Let's see where it goes.
Good evening, gentlemen. How about we make this one a night to remember?
This is all real. They won't let you go. They won't let us leave.
Those are not prisoners. Those are not subjects. Those are boys, and you are harming them.
Please! Let me out of here! I want out! I want out now!
You thought you were gonna get some playtime in the yard, boy? Is that what you thought this was gonna be?
I had no idea it would turn out this way.
Alright, so that's actually filmed from the Independent Film Channel, the Stanford Prison Experiment from 2015. It is available to watch on Amazon, I believe. I don't think it's come out on Netflix or other services, but you can rent or purchase from Amazon.com. So let's talk a little bit about this particular experiment and what happened. More than 70 applicants actually applied and answered the ad and were given diagnostic interviews as well as personality tests so they could eliminate candidates with psychological problems, medical disabilities, as well as a history of crime and drug abuse. The study comprised 24 male college students chosen from 75 volunteers who were paid $15 per day to take part in the experiment. Participants were randomly assigned to either the role of prisoner or guard in a simulated prison environment. There were 2 reserves and 1 dropped out, finally leaving 10 prisoners and 11 guards. The guards worked in sets of 3, and they were replaced after every 8-hour shift, and the prisoners were housed 3 to a room. There was also a solitary confinement cell for prisoners who misbehaved. Now, the prison simulation was kept as real life as possible. The environment was maintained to look like a prison, even down to the guards' clothing and schedule. So let's talk about what happened. Now, when we're looking at this, it's kind of frightening. Within hours, both prisoners and guards settled into their new roles. The abuse became so incredible that the experiment was cut short at just 6 days and not carrying on to the fortnight that was the initial time frame. It became so bad they had to stop the experiment sooner than they anticipated. With the prisoners, there were rumors of revolt and escape. The prisoner that dropped out, he had said that he was going to try to help everybody escape and get out of the prison. And so the immersion became so incredible and intense for these particular young men that they didn't think they would be able to leave. They were punished physically and emotionally. They weren't supposed to be hit, but apparently physical violence did actually happen. They suffered emotional damage. The guards harassed the prisoners. They punished and rewarded the prisoners by rewarding them with extra things, extra blankets, giving them a little bit more food, and they punished prisoners by making them do exercises, push-ups, jumping jacks. They called them all kinds of names. They fell into these roles very, very easily, and so it's kind of frightening to think that individuals are capable of such sadistic types of behavior, especially when they didn't really have any kind of clue that they have these particular characteristics. So what can we take from the Stanford prison experiment? People easily conform to the societal roles they are expected to play. This is also reinforced if the roles are as strongly as stereotyped as those of the prison guards. Now, the prison environment was important in generating the guards' brutality. None of the guards showed any kind of sadistic tendencies before this study. The findings support the situational environmental explanation of behavior rather than the dispositional personality one. And when we couple this with Milgram, we see that uniforms matter, building matters, and now we know that stereotyped societal roles and expectations play a role in how people conform to various types of roles, even in a simulated environment. Now I want to talk about confirmation bias. This is where you only listen to evidence that reinforces your beliefs and perspectives, and you ignore anything else that doesn't suit your particular perspective or narrative. This is quite common, and a lot of people have this. I mean, we all are subjected to this to a degree. Confirmation bias is useful in that it alleviates fear, but it also encourages the bandwagon bias, meaning that if more people believe a particular thing, that makes it more believable for other people. So that can be very, very problematic when you're trying to get across to a group of individuals particular type of evidence and they are persistent in not accepting it. People feel comfortable in being part of a group of individuals. These belief systems help them in their survival instincts. People ignore facts that contradict their belief system as it threatens this survival instinct. This is why we see people stand firm in their own belief systems and band together with others who think like they do. It alleviates fear associated with new information that challenges their core beliefs. In order to overcome that, you have to convince the person you are presenting new info to that you are not a threat to them or their beliefs. Confirmation bias is largely why we have people quick to believe false information on the internet, and in turn fuels the propaganda machine. For example, Russian propaganda and bots in the last election. So now this brings me a little bit to manipulation, because the fact of the matter is you can be manipulated and your confirmation bias can be used against you. So for particular tactics of manipulation, these are all here, and these are all things that manipulators use in order to control other people. There's gaslighting, projection, impossible arguments. So I'm going to touch on a few of these. Some of these are pretty obvious, and I'm not going to dive into too many of them. But gaslighting, that's based on a film. So gaslighting is a movie where you have a married couple, and every day the husband would dim the lights a bit. The wife would wake up and she'd walk around. She goes, "Is it a bit dimmer in here?" And he'd go, "No." And every day he would do the same thing. And this drove her to think that something was mentally wrong with her. And so gaslighting is an example of a manipulator trying to convince you that there's something mentally wrong with you, to the point it kind of drives you a little bit insane. So let's look at some of these others. Projection. They project their feelings onto you and assume that you feel the way that they do. Impossible arguments. This is where they just run you in circles, and there's absolutely no way to win whatsoever in an argument, because it's ludicrous, and essentially their defense is illogical, and they'll run you in circles and exhaust you. Let's hop over to moving goalposts, where they constantly change the rules. They're changing the goals, and they'll sit there and tell you, yeah, I didn't ask you to do that. What I really wanted was this. So there's no way to actually please them. They'll manipulate facts to suit their narrative. They'll overwhelm you with facts that you may not know. Smear campaigns are common, to where they will basically start rumors about you, or they'll say things about you, or influence other people to kind of see their perspective. And this could be family, friends, and work. They'll guilt bait you and make you feel bad. And that kind of goes in with a little bit of victimhood, to where they will play the victim like they are the ones that actually are suffering abuse from you. And they'll convince other people, and they'll try to at least, that you're the one that's hurt them, you're the one that's gaslighting them, you're the one that's moving the goalposts, you're the one that's doing the smear campaign. You can have evidence, and they'll say, oh no, that's fake evidence, that's not real evidence. They will do everything they can to go through mental backflips to blame the people they're trying to manipulate for their behavior. So it's actually quite shocking, and it's exceedingly common. And if you want to learn more about those particular types of individuals, I did do a show on the science of online predators and sexual assault, and how, so it's kind of compiled into one big one. It's a long episode, but I do dive into about 15 different topics associated with that. So you can check that out if you want to. So that concludes the science of influence, the shorts version. We've talked about the experiments, confirmation bias, manipulation tactics. We've talked about all of these things. So these are my sources, and I know you can't read these. So I'm not going to make you do that. You can go to my website, scientistmel.com. You can check out all of these slides. They're available there. It's called under resources. And then you can download it and click on these links for your own personal use, to be able to kind of get an idea and dive a bit further into influence. So I'm going to take a moment to thank my patrons. I'm on patreon.com/scientistmel to get access to exclusive content. My pledges start at just $1 a month. They also get early access to my audio podcast whenever I post a new episode. They get it a week early. And I am going to be doing a new show just for them on my Patreon account, where they're the ones who pick what it is I talk about exclusively on that channel, on my Patreon. So, thank you Tony, James, Lauren, Jen, Carl, Melanie, Patrick, Daniel, Paula, Tim, Carrie, Cersei, Keith, Zachary, Tony, Graham, Dragnot, Godless Iowan, Jennifer, Corey, and Heavy. I have a new camera because of your contributions. I can maintain my website. I have new lighting, and I have new green screen that I'm fixing to play with today and see if I can't set it up for my new show, Spirited Science. And if you're curious, Spirited Science will be aired on youtube.com/scientistmel, and hopefully on Periscope as well if I can. I hope to be able to kind of stream and get it on both. I should be able to, as well as Facebook. And it's a show where we all share an adult beverage and we talk about a particular scientist or a single science topic, and I'll have a cocktail recipe associated with that. So I want to thank you for being here. This has been the Science of Influence shorts version for people who are short on time but love science. So thank you for being here. I hope you have a fantastic day.